White man kicked his poor black ex-girlfriend out of the mall, not knowing she's now married to a billionaire. Get out of here now, you don't belong here, Richard's voice cut through the air of the luxury mall like a blade. His blue eyes flashed with contempt as he pointed at Jasmine, who had just entered the jewelry store where he worked as a manager. Silence fell among the customers who stopped to watch the awkward scene. Jasmine Williams, 28, remained strangely calm in the face of public humiliation. 3 years earlier, she had been just another girl from the suburbs in love with a man who saw her as temporary entertainment. "Richard, I just want to buy a gift," she said softly, ignoring the curious glances of the other shoppers. He laughed loudly, cruelly. "With what money? You could barely pay your bills when we were together. Stop pretending you have the class to be here." His voice echoed through the store, attracting more onlookers. The saleswoman behind the counter whispered something to her colleague, both watching Jasmine with a mixture of pity and judgment. An elegant lady shook her head, clearly uncomfortable with the situation she was witnessing. "I've worked here for 5 years and I know our clientele," Richard continued, approaching her arrogantly. "People like you only come here to cause trouble or try to pull a scam. Security." Jasmine closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. When she opened them again, there was something different about them, a calmness that only exists in those who have weathered much worse storms and learned to navigate them. 2 security guards approached hesitantly. Richard gestured impatiently. "Escort this person out. She's disturbing our customers." It was then that Jasmine smiled for the first time. Not a smile of nervousness or embarrassment, but something much deeper. "Are you sure you want to do this, Richard?" He frowned, uncomfortable with the change in her tone. "What are you talking about?" "Nothing," she replied, turning toward the exit. "I just wonder if you'll remember this moment when you find out who I've become." The words hung in the air like a prophecy, laden with a weight Richard couldn't quite decipher. As Jasmine walked calmly toward the door, her upright posture and unshakable dignity stood in stark contrast to the cruelty she had just faced. Outside, she paused for a moment, watching the movement of the mall through the glass. Her cell phone vibrated, a message from Alexander, her husband of 2 years, CEO of the largest technology company on the West Coast. "Arriving in 10 minutes, my love. The gift is beautiful." Richard had no idea that he had just humiliated the most powerful woman he would ever meet. And if this story of prejudice and reversal touched you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because what's coming next will show you that underestimating someone can be the biggest mistake of your life. Jasmine felt dozens of eyes staring at her back as she walked down the mall hallway. The whispering started low, but grew like a wave, people pointing, commenting, judging. A teenager had already started filming with her cell phone. "Did you see that? How embarrassing," a woman whispered to her husband, loud enough for Jasmine to hear. Richard emerged from the jewelry store like a satisfied predator, clearly fueled by the attention he had generated. "Folks, sorry for the disturbance," he announced to the curious customers. "Sometimes people who can't afford it show up here, thinking they can pretend to be something they're not." An elderly lady nodded approvingly. "You did the right thing, young man. You have to protect reputable establishments." Richard's smile widened. He had turned this situation into a little show of power, where he was the hero defending the natural order of things. "That's exactly right. 3 years ago, I dated this person. I believed her when she said she was trying to improve her life. Pure fantasy." Jasmine stopped. She took a deep breath. Slowly, she turned to face him. "Richard," she said, her voice cutting through the conversations. "Are you sure you want to keep talking about our past? Here, in front of all these people?" Something in her tone made his smile falter for a split second. But the audience was waiting, and Richard had never known how to back down when he had an audience. "Why not? Everyone should know the truth about people like you." He leaned in again, confident. "You could barely pay your power bills. Your car was always broken down. I remember having to cover your expenses constantly because you didn't even have an approved credit card." Every word was calculated to cut, to publicly humiliate. And it was working. Several people chuckled. Others shook their heads in disapproval directed at Jasmine. "I also remember," Richard continued, now completely lost in his own performance, "how you cried when I cancelled our dates. Always desperate, always dependent. Always begging me not to end the relationship." The truth behind his words was much darker. Jasmine clearly remembered those 3 years, how Richard had used her financial situation as a weapon, how he made her feel small and grateful for crumbs of attention. How he controlled when they went out, where they went, even how she dressed. "Do you remember the times you locked me out of the apartment after fights?" Jasmine asked calmly. Richard's laughter faltered. That's not relevant." "Or when you made me walk home at night after we fought in the car because you knew I couldn't afford a ride?" "You're twisting." "And the times you took me to expensive restaurants just to humiliate me when the bill came, knowing I couldn't pay?" Silence fell. Some people in the small crowd began to exchange uncomfortable glances. The dynamic was shifting, and Richard could feel it. "She's lying," he said quickly, but his voice had lost its arrogant confidence. "You can't believe her. She's obviously trying to make me look bad because—" "Because what, Richard?" Jasmine stepped forward. "Because I finally learned that I deserve better than to be treated like trash by someone who uses money as a tool of control." At that moment, Jasmine's phone vibrated again. She glanced quickly at it. Alexander was sending her a photo of the gift he had chosen for her. A diamond necklace that cost more than Richard earned in an entire year. But she didn't show him the photo. Not yet. Instead, she watched Richard struggle to regain control of the narrative he had created. He was starting to sweat slightly, realizing that the situation was not going as he had planned. "Look," he said, trying a more conciliatory but still condescending tone, "I don't want to create any more drama. I just think it would be better for everyone if you found places more suited to your socio-economic level." The phrase hung in the air like a thinly veiled insult disguised as well-meaning advice. Jasmine smiled again. That same mysterious smile that had made Richard uncomfortable moments ago. "Richard, you still don't get it, do you?" "Get what?" "That sometimes people change. Sometimes they grow up. And sometimes," she paused, letting the suspense build, "sometimes they become exactly what you never believed they could be." Richard frowned, confused and irritated by her enigmatic words. "What the hell are you talking about?" "You'll find out soon enough," she replied, putting her phone away. "Very soon." As Jasmine walked away for the second time, Richard stood there with a strange feeling in his stomach. There was something different about her, in her posture, her confidence, the way she had faced humiliation without breaking down. And that mysterious tone, as if she knew something he didn't. But Richard quickly dismissed these thoughts. He knew Jasmine. She was weak, dependent, with no real prospects for change. What could she have become? A store manager? A successful saleswoman? He laughed to himself, regaining his arrogance. Anything she had achieved would be insignificant compared to his own success. After all, he was the manager of one of the most exclusive jewelry stores in town. What Richard didn't know was that, 10 meters away, Jasmine was finishing typing a message to her lawyer. "Speed up the plans we discussed. It's time to start the process." And as the small crowd dispersed, commenting on the drama they had witnessed, no one noticed the discreet man in the dark suit who had filmed the entire interaction from a strategic angle, sending the video directly to a team that had been waiting for instructions for weeks. The perfect storm was brewing, and Richard still believed he was safe simply because he had publicly humiliated the woman he once loved and controlled. But sometimes, underestimating someone you've broken can be the biggest mistake you make, especially when that person has learned not only to rebuild themselves, but to rebuild themselves into a version you could never have imagined. 20 minutes after leaving the mall, Jasmine was sitting in the artisan cafe across the street, watching through the window as Richard continued his performance for any customer who would listen. He had turned the incident into a personal anecdote, telling the story over and over as if he were the hero of a romantic comedy where he put a problematic ex-girlfriend in her place. Her phone vibrated. "Alexander, finally." "My love, I just saw the video," he said as soon as she answered. His voice carried a dangerous calm she had learned to recognize. It was the same tone he used at board meetings when someone had made a very costly mistake. "What video?" Jasmine asked, though she already knew the answer. "Marcus filmed everything. The humiliation, the insults, the way that man touched you." Alexander paused. "Jasmine, you should have told me who he was." Marcus was Alexander's head of personal security, a former federal agent who had spent the last 2 years discreetly protecting Jasmine whenever she went out alone. She had never questioned why her husband insisted on this protection, Now she understood that he had always known that the past could come back to haunt her. "I didn't want you to get involved," she replied softly. "My love," his voice softened, "when someone touches you, I'm already involved. When someone humiliates you publicly, it becomes my responsibility too." Jasmine watched Richard through the window, now showing his phone to a customer, probably displaying photos of the store's most expensive jewelry as if they were his personal property. "Alex, I need to tell you something about Richard. Something I never told you." "I'm listening." Jasmine took a deep breath. "He didn't just control me emotionally. In the last months of our relationship, he forced me to sign documents I didn't understand. He said it was to help me build credit, but I later found out they were loans in my name. By the time we broke up, he had racked up over $50,000 in debt using my identity." The silence on the other end of the line was long and heavy with meaning. "Jasmine," Alexander finally said, "do you still have any documentation of these loans?" "I have copies of everything. I kept them all these years in case I ever needed to prove what he did." "And did you file a police report?" "I tried, but Richard knew people at the police department. My case was dismissed for lack of clear evidence." The chief said it was a civil matter between ex-lovers. Alexander paused, and Jasmine recognized it as the moment when his brilliant mind began to formulate a plan. "My love, where are you now?" "At the cafe across from the mall." "Perfect. Stay there. Thomas is on his way. He should be there in 15 minutes. Thomas Brennan was the Hale family's personal attorney, a man who had built his career by crushing people who underestimated justice. If Alexander was sending Thomas, it meant the situation had become official. "What are you planning?" Jasmine asked. "Justice," Alexander replied simply. "I should have done this a long time ago." While waiting for Thomas, Jasmine continued to observe Richard. He had become more animated, clearly fueled by the attention his story was generating. A young employee from the store next door had joined the small circle of onlookers, laughing at Richard's cruel imitations of his dramatic ex-girlfriend. "You should have seen how she reacted when I canceled our dates," Richard was saying, gesturing theatrically. "Tears, please, promises that she would do better. It was a 3-year nightmare, honestly." The employee laughed. "Wow, what a situation. Good thing you got rid of that burden." Richard smiled with satisfaction. "What bothers me is that she showed up here today pretending she had money to buy something. As if I didn't know exactly who she is and where she comes from." Jasmine discreetly filmed this part of the conversation through the window. Every word would be useful later. Her cell phone rang again, an unknown number. "Mrs. Hale." The voice was professional, courteous. "This is Thomas Brennan. I'm arriving at the cafe. Can you meet me at the table by the back window?" Thomas appeared to be in his early 50s, with perfectly combed gray hair and a discreet but clearly expensive suit. He sat down across from Jasmine and immediately opened a leather briefcase. "Ms. Hale, your husband briefed me on the situation. Before we proceed, I need to confirm a few details." His voice was calm, methodical. "Is the man who assaulted you today the same man who defrauded you 3 years ago?" "Yes." "Richard Coleman." Thomas made a note. "And do you have documentation of the fraudulent loans?" "I have copies of everything at home. Contracts, statements, emails where he admits to using my name." "Excellent. And are there any witnesses to today's assault?" Jasmine pointed to the mall. "Several people filmed it. Besides, Marcus has everything recorded." Thomas smiled for the first time, a small but promising smile. "Ms. Hale, as I understand it, Mr. Coleman doesn't know about your marriage to Alexander?" "He has no idea." "Nor about your current financial situation?" "He still believes I'm the same broke girl I was 3 years ago." Thomas closed his briefcase and leaned forward. "So he doesn't know he's messing with the family that owns a majority stake in the shopping center where he works?" Jasmine blinked. "What do you mean?" "Hale Corporation owns 65% of the shares in Westfield Luxury Mall. Technically, your husband is the majority owner of the establishment where Mr. Coleman works." Jasmine's blood ran faster. "He doesn't know that?" "Absolutely no one knows. The shares are in a discreet holding company that Alexander set up a few years ago." Thomas checked his watch. Ms. Hale, I have an important question. Do you just want legal justice, or do you want him to fully understand the magnitude of the mistake he made? Jasmine looked back at Richard through the window. He was now taking a selfie with two customers, probably to post on social media about his rewarding work helping classy people choose appropriate jewelry. Thomas, she said slowly, I want him to know exactly who he humiliated today. Thomas opened the folder again and took out a document. Then I suggest we start with this. He slid the paper across the table. A formal notice of proceedings for assault, defamation, and identity fraud. It will be delivered to him today, in front of colleagues and customers. And then, Thomas smiled, and this time the smile showed his teeth, we'll talk to the mall management about their security and professional conduct policies for their employees. As majority owners, we have some legitimate concerns about the environment being created for customers. Jasmine felt a mixture of satisfaction and nervousness. Isn't that too cruel? Thomas studied her respectfully. Ms. Hale, cruelty would be what he did to you. This is a consequence. And frankly, people like Mr. Coleman only learn when they face real, public consequences. At that moment, Jasmine saw Richard leave the jewelry store and walk toward the parking lot, probably for his lunch break. He walked with his usual arrogance, phone to his ear, laughing loudly at some joke he was telling. Thomas, she said, how long would it take to execute this plan? If we start now? 2 hours for the legal aspects. The rest, he checked his watch again, can be finalized by the end of the workday today. Jasmine watched Richard get into his used car, the same Honda Civic he had been driving for 5 years, now with a few rust spots she didn't remember seeing before. For a moment, part of her felt sorry for him. But then she remembered the debts he had racked up in her name, the nights she had spent crying because of his mind games, the public humiliation 2 hours ago. Let's move on, she said. Thomas waved to someone outside, another man in a suit whom Jasmine hadn't noticed arriving. This is James, my investigator. He'll start gathering additional documentation while we prepare the legal notice. While Thomas was on the phone arranging the next steps, Jasmine received a message from Alexander. How are you feeling, my love? She typed back, for the first time in years, I'm feeling powerful. The reply came immediately, this is just the beginning. Through the window, she could see mall employees coming and going during their lunch break, completely oblivious to the storm brewing. In a few hours, Richard would discover that publicly humiliating someone can have consequences far greater than his small prejudiced mind could ever imagine. What he didn't know was that while he was bragging to anyone who would listen about how he had put an ex-girlfriend in her place, the most expensive lawyers in town were already preparing the biggest reality check he would ever face. And when the truth finally exploded, there would be nowhere to hide, no excuse he could come up with, no way to undo what was about to happen. The storm Jasmine had predicted that morning was finally gathering strength, and Richard still believed he was safe simply because he had managed to humiliate the woman he once loved. At 3:30 p.m., Richard returned from lunch with the confidence of someone who had spent the last hour recounting his morning victory to any colleague who would listen. He had turned the incident into an amusing anecdote about putting people in their place, without realizing that every word had been carefully documented. Thomas was waiting at the entrance to the jewelry store, impeccably dressed in a suit, leather briefcase in hand, his posture radiating legal authority. Mr. Richard Coleman? Yes, that's me. How can I help you? Richard smiled, assuming he was a potential client. Thomas Brennan, from Brennan and Associates. I have some legal matters to discuss with you. Thomas opened his briefcase and took out a sealed envelope. This is a formal notice of a lawsuit for assault, defamation, and identity fraud. The color drained from Richard's face. What do you mean? This must be some kind of mistake. There is no mistake, Mr. Coleman. Thomas spoke loudly enough for nearby customers and employees to hear clearly. My client has substantial evidence that you physically assaulted her this morning and that you defrauded her identity 3 years ago, accumulating over $50,000 in debt in her name. The customers in the jewelry store stopped looking at the display cases and turned toward the growing commotion. The saleswoman who had laughed at Richard's jokes about Jasmine now watched him with growing horror. Who is your client? Richard stammered, even though a dark part of his mind already knew the answer. Mrs. Jasmine Hale. Richard blinked. Hale? That name doesn't. Wife of Hale Corporation CEO Alexander Hale. Thomas paused to let the information sink in. The woman you assaulted and publicly humiliated this morning is married to the man who owns a majority stake in this shopping center. Richard's world seemed to collapse in slow motion. Hale Corporation. He knew that name. It was discreetly emblazoned on the property signs at the mall entrance. Jasmine's husband wasn't just rich. He owned the place where Richard worked. That can't be true, he muttered, but his voice trembled with the growing certainty that he was facing catastrophe. Thomas pulled out another document. I also have here a preliminary report of our investigation into your fraudulent activities. Fake bank accounts, loans approved with forged documentation, unauthorized use of personal information. He paused, studying Richard with a clinical gaze. Frankly, Mr. Coleman, your forgery technique is so amateurish that I'm surprised you weren't caught sooner. At that moment, two men in suits approached. James, the investigator, and Marcus, Alexander's head of security. Both carried bulky briefcases. Mr. Brennan, James said, we have confirmed that Mr. Coleman was filmed this morning committing assault. We have the incident recorded from multiple angles. Marcus opened his tablet and showed the screen to Thomas, but positioned it so that Richard could see it too. It was a crystal-clear video of him pushing Jasmine, yelling at her, touching her aggressively. Every word of humiliation was captured with perfect audio clarity. In addition, Marcus continued, we discovered that Mr. Coleman posted about the incident on social media approximately 45 minutes ago. He swiped the screen, revealing Richard's own posts on Facebook and Instagram, where he had proudly displayed how he had taught a troublesome ex-girlfriend a lesson. Richard felt nausea rising in his stomach. He had documented his own crimes on social media. And here, said James, opening his own folder, we have Mr. Coleman's confessions to several colleagues during their lunch break, all recorded by witnesses who were disturbed by his statements. A small crowd had formed. Employees from other stores, curious customers, even the mall manager had appeared upon hearing the commotion. Richard noticed every glance, every whisper, every expression of shock and disapproval directed at him. Thomas checked his watch. Mr. Coleman, in approximately 10 minutes, mall management will receive a formal letter from Hale Corporation expressing serious concerns about the safety and professional conduct of specific employees. As majority owners, they have certain expectations about the environment that is maintained here. Richard tried to speak, but could only manage a strangled sound. Reality was solidifying around him like concrete. He had attacked the wife of the man who controlled his livelihood, documented it all publicly, and now faced both legal and professional consequences. There's more, Thomas continued, pulling out a third folder. Our accountants have discovered that the fraudulent loans you took out in Mrs. Hale's name have never been repaid. With compound interest and penalties, the current debt is $87,000. We will be seeking full repayment, plus punitive damages. The jewelry store saleswoman whispered to a colleague, my God, he attacked the wife of the mall owner. Richard finally found his voice, though it came out as a desperate quack. I didn't know who she was. I didn't know she was married to. That changes everything, right? I can apologize. I can explain. Thomas stared at him with utter coldness. Mr. Coleman, do you believe that assaulting a woman becomes acceptable if she isn't married to someone powerful? The question hung in the air like a judgment. Several people in the crowd made expressions of disgust. And no, Richard stammered. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean, exactly? Thomas waited, letting the silence drag on painfully. That your actions this morning were justified until you discovered your victim had the resources to defend herself? Richard realized he was being dismantled not only legally, but morally, in front of dozens of witnesses. Every word he said only dug his hole deeper. Marcus received a message on his cell phone and nodded to Thomas. Ms. Hale is on her way. Through the glass doors of the mall, Richard could see Jasmine walking calmly toward the jewelry store. But now her presence carried something different, not vulnerability or fear, but an unshakable dignity that made several people step aside respectfully to make way for her. Behind her, a tall, dark-haired man walked with a natural confidence of someone accustomed to being in charge. Even from a distance, Richard could sense the aura of power emanating from Alexander Hale. Mr. Coleman, Thomas said as they watched the couple approach, would you like to take this opportunity to properly apologize to Mrs. Hale? Or would you prefer to wait for this matter to be resolved entirely in court? Richard looked around, at the crowd of judgmental faces, At the cell phone cameras now documenting his downfall, at the legal documents sealing his fate, at the woman he had so catastrophically underestimated approaching with a husband who could destroy him with a single phone call. For the first time in years, Richard Coleman viscerally understood what it meant to be completely powerless as he watched the most epic reversal of his life unfold before dozens of witnesses. And as the consequences of his prejudices and arrogance finally came to collect, one question hung in the air: were 3 minutes of cruel satisfaction worth the destruction of an entire life built on the illusion of superiority? What was about to happen when Jasmine finally came face to face with a man who thought he could humiliate her with impunity would show that some lessons in humility can only be learned in the most public and devastating way possible. As Jasmine and Alexander approached the crowd, Richard desperately tried one last gambit. "Jasmine, please, you know me. We can settle this civilly." She stopped a few feet away from him, her posture radiating a dignity that made all the whispering cease. "Richard, I knew you. The man who controlled me, humiliated me, stole my identity." Her voice was calm but powerful. "But you never truly knew me." Alexander placed his hand gently on his wife's shoulder, not protectively, but respectfully. "My love, how do you want to proceed?" Richard realized that not even her billionaire husband spoke for her. Jasmine had become her own voice. "We just want justice to be done," she replied, looking Richard straight in the eye. "Nothing more, nothing less." 6 months later, Richard was facing criminal charges, had lost his job, and was living with his parents trying to pay off millions in fines. Jasmine, on the other hand, had used the experience to found a legal support organization for victims of domestic violence and financial fraud. The former saleswoman who laughed at Richard's cruel jokes resigned on her own, ashamed. The mall implemented rigorous training on discrimination after public pressure. Jasmine discovered that true revenge was not to destroy Richard, it was to build something bigger than his prejudices could ever touch. When someone tries to diminish you, don't stoop to their level. Rise so high that they become irrelevant. And if this story of transformation touched you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because sometimes the best response to hate is simply to become unreachable to it.